Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Now let's talk about the Sega Dreamcast. In my opinion, the Sega Dreamcast is one of the most underrated consoles of all time. We all know by this point it was a bit of a commercial failure and pretty much only had 2 years of games before the thing was killed off and support stopped as far as I remember. But a friend of mine recently gave me his old Sega Dreamcast. Now when he gave it to me, it wasn't working properly. In fact, it wasn't really working at all. Now I've already gone through the machine and just made it basically work again and make sure it's actually functioning and safe. But today, we're going to do some fun upgrades and modifications to it. So if somebody making their ultimate Sega Dreamcast in 2025 sounds like something you want to watch, then let's get straight into it. Okay, well let's talk about the modifications we're going to do to this Dreamcast. Now first of all, we're going to do what is a very popular mod at the moment, and that's known as the GDEMU. Now one of the reasons I want to do the GDEMU on this particular system is because the optical drive is broken. I don't know if you can see here, but there is a tear in the ribbon cable. Now I'm not sure when this has happened, if this happened when I initially took this apart to actually inspect it and give it a clean out, because I don't know if I've mentioned, when I got this machine it was actually floating in engine oil. Yeah, there was loads of engine oil in all the ports and on the main board from where this had been stored in a garage and some engine oil had leaked on it, but the optical drive was completely full of it and I had to clean it out. And I think I might have torn the cable then, I'm not sure. But to be honest with you, I didn't really have many plans to use it anyway, so I'm not that bothered. Hold on a moment. Engine oil? How did this happen? Well, I actually got given this Dreamcast by my good friend James, also known as JM on Cars here on YouTube. Now, as I said, this was in his garage, and because he's a car person, somehow engine oil managed to make its way into it. But why am I telling you this? Well, that is because myself, James from JM and Cars, and Ant from Sports and Touring have started a podcast called The Radiator Arms. And why is this relevant? Well, because in the first episode, we actually go in depth and talk about this Dreamcast, how we got it, and really the story behind it. So if you're also into automotive stuff, film, music, and other general tech bits, give it a listen. It might be something for you. Now, I've gone for revision 5.15, which is one of the cheapest revisions, and I think there's only 2 games it has issues in out of the entire Dreamcast library, where you have to patch it, I believe, to get it to run properly. I can't remember what games they are. I will put them on the screen now. But I believe there's been patches for these games anyway, for this particular revision of board, so it doesn't really matter. You can get newer boards with different firmware on it because you can't update the firmware on these at all because you'll risk bricking it. Firmware updates is pretty much only reserved for genuine units and not these kind of AliExpress knockoffs. But it doesn't really matter for what I'm doing with it. And other differences include some of them come with heat sinks on chips and a full metal cover over the SD card reader, but that's not really a problem. Now, speaking of the SD card reader, with mine, I've decided to go for one of these SD card extensions, which goes onto the board like so, and will slot into this little cover plate, which goes onto the GDEMU unit, which will make it look nice and neat in the case, rather than when you open up the optical drive bay, just having a completely empty area here where you just see the main board, and that's not good for airflow either as far as I'm aware. Now, speaking of airflow, I've decided to go with a Noctua fan upgrade. The reason being because the stock fan on the Dreamcast is actually quite loud. What I'm going to do is include a clip now of just how loud that fan is. Yeah, that is not quiet at all. Now, the fact that I'm changing out the fan also leads me to one of the next modifications I plan to do. Now, what I have here is something called the Dream PSU, and that is basically this little board which takes 12-volt input here on a barrel jack socket and converts it down to the different voltages that the Dreamcast actually requires. Now, even though this is revision 2, apparently some of these are not always the best, and it depends massively on the actual power brick you're using to feed it. It's got to have enough amperage and it's got to be of good quality. So this was cheap. This is kind of more of an experiment to see if this is actually any good or not, or if it can be stable. Now, the reason why is because when you change the fans out for one of these Noctua ones or other fans, sometimes there's not quite as much airflow, which is a little bit of a trade-off you take for having less noise. And that's another issue that can be with the GDEMUs as well, with airflow, is that if you don't have these shrouds, that can also restrict airflow to the original power supply. And the original power supplies apparently overheat for two reasons. Now, one of the main reasons is that when you use the GDEMU, you're no longer pulling 12 volt from the system at all, and apparently the regulators sit there doing nothing and get quite warm, and therefore the power supply can get quite warm and overheat. I don't know, I haven't experienced this myself, this is just what a lot of people say. Not everybody has that issue when they run the GDEMU, so what some people do is they will completely remove the 12 volt regulator off the board of the main power supply, or they'll put a whole bunch of resistors on the 12 volt line on the power supply to make sure there's some load on it and to make sure it doesn't overheat. Can't really comment with that, haven't had any experience with it. One of the reasons I don't want to remove the 12 volt rail from my power supply, which I could do, is because apparently that is used for some SCART and HDMI adapters. Now, being in the United Kingdom, I use SCART connections for my TV, so I would like to keep that functionality if possible. Now, I'm not going to put this in straight away. I am going to use the original power supply initially, and the reason being is I just want to make sure that all the other modifications I'm doing are stable first before I introduce this, and then I have to start troubleshooting and going back and forth. Now, if it works properly with the original power supply, I'll move it over to this little Dream PSU. But if when I move over to the Dream PSU this doesn't work properly, what I will then do is perhaps do some resistor mods to the original power supply, or just see if the original power supply overheats at all. It might not actually be that necessary to do. Now, also here is a bag of bits for quite an important mod. Now, the controller ports on the Dreamcast are well known for having issues. And those issues are that they have a non-resettable fuse, so if you wiggle the controller in a weird way in the port, you can actually end up blowing the fuse through it and your controller ports don't work. So I believe this bit here is the resettable fuse, which means when you remove power to the console and give it a second, the fuse will reset and you don't have to worry about trying to replace a fuse on the board. There's also a little capacitor for the controller board as well, which needs replacing. And then there's this resistor here. I don't know if this is for the Noctua fan mod. I'll have to look that up again, and we'll go over that when we actually do the controller board mod. It may be for the Noctua fan mod or other things like that, because when you change the fan out for the slower spinning one, apparently the Dreamcast will not always boot if it can't detect enough resistance over two of the cables. Can't remember which one it is over the top of my head right now, but when we come to the time of actually installing this fan, we'll go over it in full detail. So you need these 10k resistors to put in line over a couple of the wires. I believe it's the fan sensor wire and 5 volts, just to tell the machine, hey, yeah, there is actually a fan attached and you can boot up. There's also here a removable battery holder for the rechargeable battery on the main board, so the clock might actually have a chance of keeping in time when you take it off from the power supply, which would be nice. And there's a little CR2032M, I think it is, rechargeable battery in here, which goes into that holder. But as you can also see here, this Dreamcast is a little bit yellowed, a little bit worn, and not looking in the best shape. So what I'm going to do is change the shell from this to this. Yeah, I ordered a clear shell online and I thought that would look quite cool. And I've got a Crystal original Xbox as well, and I like the look of the kind of like 90s aesthetic of a lot of the clear electronics we had back then. So I thought, you know what? I'll give this a go and see how this shell is and see how it comes out. Right, so let's start taking this machine apart. First thing I'm going to do is remove the modem. And then there are 4 screws to actually get this to pieces. One on this side here, one on this side over here, one here, and one here as well. And these screws should just come out and we can put them safely aside. And then we just lift off the top like so. And then that reveals the main board with the optical drive, the power supply, and all the other gubbins. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the optical drive. That's just 3 screws holding that in. Another one over this side here. And the whole optical drive assembly should just, lift off the board like so. This is why it's actually such an easy modification to make for the GDEMU. It's just on this little interconnector board, and you get it in place, sit it on, and boop, that's it, it's in. Obviously you need to kind of put things in to hold it down and screws and bits, but it's really simple. You know, you technically don't need to do any further mods if you just want to play like backup copies of games. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the power supply. Now be careful with power supplies, people, please, especially when there's been mains voltage and things going through them. You can easily shock and kill yourself, and if I'm honest, that's not a good time, and I will not be responsible for your death. So don't take this as a tutorial, more as entertainment. So just removing this wire here, which is for the power switch. Now there are two screws on the power supply board, one over here and one over here. And the board in theory should just lift out with a little bit of persuasion, because you've got these pins here which actually go onto the main board and pass the power through, and that will just move out the way, along with this shield here, which is to protect the power supply from touching metal components. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take off the controller ports, and there's just 4 screws on the front. But first, there is a ribbon cable we're going to disconnect, and just gently slide that out the way, and I will slide that off the board too, the main board that is, and pop that over here. Okay, and now you should be able to just pull to one side and remove this, and you've got the fan connector here. Now you need to be really careful with this. This is a delicate fiddly connector. So when removing this and pulling on this, to make sure you don't pull out the whole connector off the board, I would use a bit of your thumb to hold onto the plastic connector here, and just grip with your fingernails and around the side here the actual fan wiring, and that should come out without pulling this off the board. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the power switch. Now, it's worth mentioning as well that the screws for the power supply and the screws for the power switch, at least on my console, are slightly different lengths. So keep those aside and keep them with their respective bits and bobs, just so you don't lose them and just so you don't mix them up and you don't end up splitting the case when you go to reassemble it. Because I've seen it before, you start splitting this plastic part here, and then, oh dear, you've now got a bit of plastic which is broken and nothing is staying in with the screws. I'm going to do the fan screws over here as well. As you'll notice, those are much smaller screws as well and very different. So I'm going to put those to one side. And now we need to start doing the main board screws, which actually removes it from the case. So you've got a whole bunch of different ones here. On this left side of the board, there's 2 kind of the lighter silver, maybe nickel, zinc plated screws. And you just pull those off. Now, got to make sure that you remember where those come from, because those are, as I said, specific to that area. Then you've got these black ones on the back here and here. So that should be 7 screws in total, I think, holding the main board down into the chassis. Right, and then the main board should just lift out like so, which is nice. And that'll come with the fan as well. Now, normally the fan would be removed by these 2 screws here. I'm not actually sure how this is going to come around when we do the mounting of the other fan, but I'm not going to do the other fan straight away. For testing purposes, I do actually want to keep the original fan in place, just so I can make sure the machine works properly, because I've never really played around with this particular Dreamcast. I don't know if there's any other errors or issues that I need to look at or take care of before I actually go any further. And then there is this metal shield here, which needs to be pulled out. And then obviously you've got this controller ports around as well, but that's pretty much it. That is the system disassembled. Okay, so what I've decided to do actually is I'm just going to unscrew this fan from the board here, and I'm going to set it in the new shell, just so it's sitting down, so I don't actually have to pull out the entire main board when it comes time to remove this, because we've got this this bit here which should hold it down and should actually keep it in place. I can put like a little bit of tape or something on this for now, just to keep it held down. But that way, as I said, I won't have to remove this entire main board just to remove this fan. So, the new shell. Oh, it does have some screws, so I think these screws are for actually holding the shells. And I'm not really sure which ones these are for and are meant to be replacing. That might actually, maybe that's for the modem attachment area. I don't really know. I guess we'll find out as things progress. So first things first, transfer over the lower part of the metal shielding, which will just move into place like so. Now the next step I'm actually going to do is just slide in the main PCB itself, because it's a bit of a pain to get it past this and to sit right. Okay, that does appear to be down and sitting where it should be now. Yep, those connectors here are lining up. Now I'm going to put this on, which does have the thermal pad for anybody asks for this particular chip here. I assume that's the main CPU. Okay, and that all appears to be sat down flush into place as it should. So I'm just going to put the screws in and just go from there. I'm going to reuse the original screws, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread them. Oh, I'm going to try not to drop them. Thread them in like so and make sure it feels like they're going into the threads properly, which it does, and I can't hear or feel any snapping, and nothing looks like it's stress cracking on here, so I assume these screws are absolutely fine to use, so I'm just going to keep sending it. Obviously, they perhaps do feel slightly tighter than the other shell, but the other shell has been apart before, and this is a brand new shell. Final one of the black screws over here. And that appears to be down nice and tight there, so it's just these ones on this side. And lastly, this screw, and that is the main board screwed back down. So now it's time to put the power supply back on. Now remembering not to forget this shield. That sits in place like so. Okay, and with the shield in place, the next thing we probably want to do is the power switch, so we can route the cabling correctly for that. Very fiddly, and of course you've got to get it on completely straight, because you do not want to snap the plastic on this. Okay, so those are now tight and sitting as it should, which means it's time for the power supply next, and that requires just a little bit more fiddling, because I can't remember how we're going to route the cable on this, if we want to route this under, which I believe we probably do, to be fair, underneath the actual power supply itself. I think that makes the most sense, and I believe that's, yeah, that feels like that's exactly how that went anyway. Yeah, that's good. That is clipped over, and this is on, which is meaning it's not going to rub against the metal shield, just feeling underneath there. That is okay. That looks all as it should down there. And this cable actually has movement under there, so it's not catching. And this bit here, where the actual AC input is flush and sat how it should, which means we are free to put in the screws for the power supply. Now, these screw holes are a little bit on the tighter side. Maybe that is perhaps what these smaller screws are. I don't know if they're exactly the same. They might be slightly different, but I prefer to use the original screws where possible, and it will go in without snapping the plastic. I can feel that. It's not binding up nastily. Yeah, and those screws are actually fully down. There is no movement in the power supply, which means I can actually put this connector on, push this cable out of the way, and in theory, I will just test it quickly. Yeah, that will actually sit in and close up without this power cable getting caught. And it is nice as well, because this is a clear machine. We can actually see the cables for it, so that's good. I don't actually think this fan either is going to slide out of this, so I probably don't actually need to put any tape or anything down, because that's not actually coming out either from this original little bit of the fan holder. Having said that though, there are actually 2 screw holes here on this shroud, so I could just find some screws that'll go through into this in my collection and hold it on that way, rather than it being screwed down at the bottom. So I think that's probably what I'll do, so I can at the very least keep this removable but keep it secure. Yeah, that's a good idea. I think I will end up doing that. But for the meantime, let's get this controller board back in. Now you can snake that under the power supply, or this is a thought. Did I need to? No, I don't think I do. Okay, now that's good. I didn't actually need to put this in before the power supply. That's nice. And that goes in place. Maybe this is where these go. I don't know. Looking at the length of them, I don't think so. Well, I'm going to put these in and just see how it feels. No, it feels like it's going in okay. As I said, if you were splitting it, you would start to hear little creaks and cracks on the plastic, which would tell you that it's time to remove it and put a different screw in. Okay, and that is the last screw there for that. Now, as I have previously mentioned, this is going to need to come out again because I have modifications to make to this board. For now, it'll be good enough to test and make sure it's all as it should be. Now let's do the GDEMU. That will require a little bit of assembly. not too much, just a little bit. First thing that I've got to do is take out these small little screws for the SD card retaining area, and that should just slot in like so. You've got these two little teeny weeny screw holes on the side, and all that does is just stop this board from coming out. Now I must say, I'm not sure if white was the right choice of surround for this. I don't know how that's actually going to look when it's all together. I may change it. I may 3D print one of my own. I may see if I can get like a clear plastic one or something to match if they do that, or a different colour one, something. But we'll see. For now, that'll be okay. Next thing we have to do is put this little button in, which allows you to press this button on the board. I can't remember exactly what this button is meant to do. I'm sure I will figure it out though in due course. And then we just slide in the SD card extension cable into the GDEMU, and I'm going to fold this cable down here like so, and there are two screws that just need to go into this, which holds the plastic adapter or the plastic little shroud onto the GDEMU board, and that's good. That means the SD card goes in and out. You can press the button, nice and clicky. This is all in place, and this cable is folded over, and it's not too stressed that I'm aware of really here. It seems okay, sitting naturally. So then the next step is just to put this onto the board. And when I say the board, I mean the main board on the console. So you've got these screws here. The smaller one goes to this back bit here to hold it onto the chassis. And this larger one here with a little spacer goes on the front here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this screw through this hole. And I'm going to put this through here. And just kind of line it up on the board in a way where it can't fall through anywhere. And then line this connector up and simply push down. Okay, that is that technically installed there, and this means that this little screw head is in the right place over the right hole. Screw it up like so. But before I go all the way, I'm just going to back it off a bit and make sure I line up the screw hole for the rear screw on this housing, which also goes through a little locating nub in there too. Okay, that's on there. And that one is also done up now, so it's just a case of putting a fan on and this little connector here for the controller board to the main board, or this little ribbon cable, should I say. We have no leftover screws apart from the one for the original optical drive. We've got the black shell screws, which actually hold this, you know, the top to the bottom on there. And we've got these ones for the fan itself. Now I'm just going to go off camera and I'm going to find some screws in my collection to hold this in here, and then we'll plug this back in and we'll put it together and we'll give it a test. Okay, so I found a couple of random screws in my collection which have done the job and are holding this on, so we have no need to worry about having issues removing this later down the line. And when we pop this in now, oh yeah, we can see that goes in perfectly. So I'm just going to plug this connector back in, and yet again I want to hold this while I do it, because you don't want to break that connector from the board, which would be a bit of a pain in the bottom. What I now need to do is just screw down the actual fan shroud itself. There we go, couple of screws, in it goes, easy peasy, no problems. And that's just kind of, well, wired in. That I think is, that's really it. Are we done now? Do we just, I mean, I know we've got the modem to do, but overall, oh yeah, it's got to slide over the AC port. I think that's possibly it. Okay, let's put these screws in, because I'm sure that'll hold together better when we got the screws in. Okay, last screw. I have to say, I think everything is sat flush and how it should be. I don't know if the fit on this is as perfect as, say, the original shell, but it's not bad. That's all pressing down and working as it should. Front ports, they look good. So we've just got to do the modem now, and I assume with this it's just two screws and it comes out. Yeah, that does appear to be the case. So just slide it into the new housing. Now this bit's a bit a bit more fiddly. Fiddly bugger. Is there a better way to do this? Maybe this needs to go down on there first, perhaps? And then does the modem need to slide in under? It just isn't sliding in. Obviously you don't want to force anything. You don't want to bend and break anything. I'm going to save myself the editing frustration and come back when it's done. I managed to do it. That was incredibly fiddly for some reason, and this kind of the actual plastic part of the port wouldn't go through easily without kind of trying to bend the metal tab underneath it. I did do it, and yeah, it's all screwed in, and it looks cool, and it's ready to go. So let's just... Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, I like this. I like the way this looks. Still not totally sold on this white bit yet. I think I'm going to need to make something different or get something different. Now, I don't know. I could 3D print myself one of the shrouds, and I could use this nice green colour here. I also just have some standard black ABS plastic, which is what I use to actually make the fan adapters for the Noctua fan kit, but we'll come to that later. But for now, that'll do. Let's plug the thing in and see if it works still. Right. So I've got everything hooked up. I'm turning the power on to my TV, and I've got the controller plugged in as well. Let's hit the power button and see what happens. Well, it works and doesn't appear to have blown up. That's a good sign. Like I suspected, it's going to ask the time and date. For now, we'll just... Controller's still working. That's good. Let's go by this. Oh, what's this doing? Is this... Okay, no, so it isn't loading into the GDEMU yet. Let's hit the play button. Oh, what is on this? Has this got games on it already? Oh, that's a bit naughty, isn't it? Sorry, this has got a bit of a reflective screen here, but we'll do our best to capture a bit of video footage for now. I do have a capture card, but the issue is I don't think it works with 60 Hertz signals very well, and I think this kind of puts out between 50 and 60 depending on the game and where it's from. So yeah, let's have a little look. Let's look at some Crazy Taxi.
We're back. It's Crazy Taxi 2.
Right, well, I've turned the music volume down for obvious reasons. I don't know how well you can hear the game audio, but we're just going to do a quick little test. And this TV is doing some weird flickering. I think it's to do with this SCART port on this being a bit broken. Let's go.
Shall we? Alright, hold tight.
It's been a long time since I played Crazy Taxi. Oh.
Doesn't matter.
And there we go. That is a little bit of gameplay so far from the Dreamcast. Appears to all be working as it should. So what I need to do now is spend some time testing it and making sure it's all okay before we do our upgrades. Or the rest of the upgrades, should I say. Well, after a bit of testing last night, I can conclude that everything does appear to be working as it should be. So now I want to move on to the Dream PSU. So I happen to have laying around this 12 volt 5 amp power supply. Now the Dream PSU, as far as I'm aware, only needs really around 3 amps. So there should be enough kind of headroom and leftover current delivering capabilities on this particular power supply that it shouldn't be an issue. I think it was for an old monitor or something like that. So in theory, it should be stable enough. You can tell I've had it a while. It's got little paint speckles and things like that on it. But other than that, it does work. Now, what I don't know entirely is the polarity of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my multimeter here to just check a couple of things. So what I've got out now is my multimeter, and I've set it to basically make a noise and confirm continuity on a circuit. So when you put the probes and the multimeter together, it'll tell you if there is a connection or not. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because I want to confirm on this jack socket here whether the center pin or the actual outer part of the casing of the socket is negative or positive. Okay, so what I've done is I've back probed the positive wire, what I assume is positive on this setup, which is red, and that shows that is connected to the center pin. And that, as I said, is important because I want to find out what the polarity of this power supply here actually is. So I'm going to plug it in, and there is a green light on the power supply. So I've set my multimeter to DC volts up to 20. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the positive probe in where I believe to be the positive, the central part. And when I touch it to the negative, you can see here we've got 12 volts. So that is wired correctly, which means we're not going to get the polarity the wrong way round and potentially blow things up. I'll be honest with you, I'm good at electronics, but I'm not an absolute expert. And this doesn't have a lot of bits on the board to really, I suppose, do protection of things. That's quite nice, actually. I realise it's got some 12 and 5 volt headers on here, so that could be good if you wanted to add lights, add extra fans and fancy things like that. But yeah, I'm not sure really what the protection circuitry is like on this, so that's why I wanted to confirm what the voltage was first, so I don't blow things up. Right, first step then, we've got to take out this power supply. As I've said, be careful when working with power supplies, especially stuff that has had mains voltage going through it. At the least, it'll hurt when it shocks you, and at the most, in theory, it can kill you. Screw one out. Just pull off the power switch there. We are actually going to reuse that power switch as well, which is nice. So the power supply can just lift out like so. And we won't need this protection layer anymore because that is for the original power supply, because this is much smaller and it's not at risk of shorting out on the lower metal shield here. And it sits on like so, and then you use one of those screws left over from the power supply, and that is what holds that down to the board. So pretty simple, and yeah, quite solid as well, because you've got like the mechanical mounting here of the electrical pins going into the socket, and just this to stop it from coming out. And then we have the actual power cable itself, and that just goes boop on top like so. You can just feed that round wherever, and yeah, that's it. That is the Dream PSU actually mounted to the main board. And then all we have to do is just pop this bit in, which is the actual AC jack. I'm going to connect it up first so we can get this the right way round and get the cable to sit as we want. The cable's actually probably longer than it needs to be by the looks of things. It's giving me a bit of a fight. And then it just slides down like so. And you just kind of make the cables sit somewhere how you like and just tuck them around so they're kind of neat. That's really it. You know, and I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than that. That's it in. Let's plug in the power supply and just see if it fires up. Interesting. I haven't got the light on the controller port. What's going on there? But the fan is on though. I'm going to check my voltages now. Fortunately, we have got ground connections of pinouts on the board, so I can see ground here and got 5 volts here. Let me just bring that. Oh, nothing on the 3.3 volt rail. Interesting. I got 12 volts, so maybe this Dream PSU is faulty, because as said, there is no 3.3 volts going on here. What is that all about? Yeah, I'm checking it directly at the socket onto the board as well. There must be a fault with this Dream PSU, which is highly irritating. So let's just inspect the board, see if I can see anything that looks visibly broken. I'm looking at all the solder joints on the socket here, and I can't see any issues there. I can't see any components that are missing that appear to not be there as they should. So this is all soldered down. I guess there's just a fault with this board. I mean, I'm going to pop it on. I'm going to try it one more time and just see if it's a case of it needs moving about and perhaps wiggling about, or something like that, taking off, reinserting maybe. But I don't think that's the case. I think that this Dream PSU is dead, which would be such a shame if that's the case. So I was looking forward to using that. No light here. Yeah, the 3.3 volt rail on this, for whatever reason, just doesn't work. And it's not going to be a power supply because it's stepping it down. It's got 12 here and it's stepping it down to 5 over here. So it's going to be something on this actual Dream PSU board. Such a shame. Never mind. What can you do? Well, with that Dream PSU out of the way for now, I figured I might as well move on to something else before I reinstall the original power supply back into this. And I think we should have a little look at the Noctua fan mod. Now this is a little 3D printed mount which allows you to put the fan in, and this just slots into the case here, and it screws down much like the original fan shroud would. So the way it works with this 3D printed mount is it sits in here, and part of it will actually kind of be held in by these little plastic clips, and the other one is held in by a screw, or in my case what I'm going to use, one of these little rubbery fan holders that came in the Noctua kit for the fan itself. Now what am I thinking? I'm thinking I'm just gonna maybe, do I do it this way? Do I put it through like so? Yep, I think that's what we're gonna do, and that's it. That is now mounted in, and you just kind of cut off the excess that you don't need. So in this case, what I'm gonna do is cut in between here, and that cuts that off, makes it a bit neater. And I'm going to cut on this second one here, so there's enough if it ever needs to kind of be pulled through and pulled out again, and that shouldn't cause any issues just sitting in there. But other than that, that's pretty good. I think there's a bit of an oversight with this design here. This isn't actually fitting on. That's the only way that can fit on, though. It must be to do with this bit of metal on the board here. Am I going to have to modify the main board for this to sit in? I think, do you know what? I think I am. I think I'm going to have to modify the this bit here on the main board to get this to actually fit down, because it's not going by this. So at least with this bracket here, this is a, oh, hang on, unless, no, it doesn't slide by it either. It doesn't want to slide by it, and this is the correct thickness for the kit. Oh, right. Well, it's only going to be a minor modification, I think. Ah, right. Fortunately, this is just a heatsink bit. So now what I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to pull out this entire board off of this, and I'm going to modify this so this slides down and this sits in place and it works as it should. I'm actually going to have to take this off again anyway, because I need to have the fan off so I can screw this down into place first. But fortunately, that should just actually, yeah, pull out quite nicely. So you can see with how this is designed to fit that it goes through here, and the fan is actually meant to slip by this section here. So I'm just gonna notch that out a little bit, because there shouldn't be any PCB under that. I will check, of course, obviously. Okay, so I have been away and I have done some work. I decided not to do my soldering on camera here, though I have taken a few photos for you to look at so you can see it during the process. Reason being because it's quite fiddly, it's quite small work and a bit kind of far away for the camera to get nicely. And I just figured, you know what? People have seen soldering before. It's a long, slow, laborious process to kind of get it right and neat the way I want. Yeah, it's one of those processes which is a little bit fiddly because the wires are small, and I've got to get this resistor in. But basically what I did was I cut the wires off the original fan there, and then I cut them down to a length where I could attach the wires from the Noctua fan. And what I ended up doing was soldering a resistor in line. Now it's a 10k resistor that you have to solder in between the tack signal and the 5-volt line. Basically, if you don't have that, it's more than likely that the Dreamcast with the 5-volt Noctua fan, the fact it spins slower anyway, won't boot up properly. So basically, when you put that in line, it fools the main board into thinking the fan is spinning at roughly the same speed as the original one, and that works all fine. So I did that, then I extended the wires, and I just tucked them underneath the fan mount and plugged them into the controller board here, and that's actually turned out really quite neat. The only thing I didn't like, and I've taken a photo of this to show you as well, is the fact that I had to shave this frame down. So as you can see from the photo I've included, I actually did have to shave down quite a lot of this little heat shield for this fan to actually slide in and fit in. I did notice that it appeared it used part of this fan's metal assembly, possibly as a heat sink too, but there's so much surface area on this for the heat to dissipate that I'm not really worried about it too much. And from what I've found, people who do these Noctua mods, it's never the actual system on chip overheating, it's always power supply issues that they have with overheating. But only time will tell. As I said, this is going to be a bit of a long-term experiment for me to see if actually putting this fan in is worth it. And I can always return it back, and I can always get another shield, I'm sure, or get a dead machine and transfer the shield over. I mean, in fact, some of this does actually still make some contact with this metal frame anyway when it's in place. So I could put maybe a bit of thermal grease or compound or something and it would still transfer heat out through the fan. So I'm not too worried about that. I don't think it's going to be an issue anyway. But that brings us to our next issue. Because the profile of the fan has changed, it actually interferes with the latch mechanism, and when you go to put this down on top, it just won't go down. It's getting caught on here. So what I've done is I've 3D printed, this is also an ABS plastic, a new latch which should go in here, and as you can see it's got a little cutout in it which makes space for the top of the Noctua fan. So I'm just going to start by pulling this spring off. Then I will undo these screws here, which hold the latch mechanism down, and it has these little plastic washers going on there. And then this should just slide up and out, and you can see for comparison the two different parts there. So yeah, this should in theory just slide into place, yeah, like it's done there, and that actually does hold that lid down, which is good. Put the screw through the little washer. And the file that I printed off is apparently specifically for these aftermarket shells. So we will see. And I guess you put it down enough so there still can be movement in this, but it can't pop off. Because you don't want to completely shut this down, because otherwise the issue you're going to have is that it'll actually catch on this, and it won't. It'll lock in place. It won't move. Now, having said that, I feel that the actual mounting point on the case is a little bit prouder. So actually, if I make this, yeah, this is bottomed out now, and actually there is still movement in there. So yeah, but obviously you just kind of want to watch that, make sure you're not over tightening anything. Okay, so in theory it's just this little spring that needs to go on. Obviously, because springs are fiddly, this will be tremendously fiddly. But we have a look. Is it going to work? So there's possibly a little bit of adjustment that needs to happen here, because this is not quite fully releasing all the time. Yeah, even pushing it down, so perhaps I just need to trim a tiny bit of this off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a file and just file this ever so slightly up until the point where it wants to release nicely. Because I think that's what's going on here. It's just sitting in a little bit too further than perhaps this original one was. But I'm actually going to go one better than that. I'm just going to ever so slightly heat up my soldering iron and just see if I can kind of push this back and melt it back a little bit. And that way it will keep some of its structural rigidity as well, in theory. There we go. Look at that. A little bit of ingenuity. Okay, it probably clicks down a bit more than one would want, but to be honest with you, it's not something I'm really opening all the time there. That's actually a nice little win. Now let's put this on and see if this... Oh yeah, look at that. That clears and... Okay, well, you can see that apparently it's oh no, actually maybe it's... No, when there's actually down on there, it does sit on the fan, and it does move it perhaps a little bit on the mount, but I don't think there's anything to worry about. As I said, I'm not going to be opening this all the time anyway. It's only going to be very rarely to change out games, and yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm happy with that. That's fine. That's done as it should. Now, speaking of 3D printing, I haven't been entirely happy with this one because I don't like the colour, if I'm honest. And also, when the lid pushes down on the top of the Dreamcast, this bit here, sometimes it makes contact with the SD card and it's just enough to click it up and push it out of place. So I went online and I printed this. This is a nice orange GDEMU shroud that I can also use for this build, and it'll match the orange light on the main board, and I think will look kind of cool as well through the clear shell. It comes in a couple of bits which just screw on here, and that also has a adapter mount for the little nub in here. So that in theory should just push into place, screw down, and then this will mount on top of here as well. And instead of having the Dreamcast logo, it has the GD-ROM logo in here. A nice little thing like that. And because I've got a textured plate as well, it's got a nice finish to it, and I think it looks quite cool. And here we go. We have the nice orange GDEMU cover in place, and I didn't bother filming that because it's pretty much the same kind of thing as the other one. But what's nice now is that it goes out this way, the SD card, rather than directly on top. So if you touch the top of this shell and kind of press it about or anything, it's not actually going to try and eject the SD card, which is really nice. Now what we've got to do to finish off for the day is to do the modifications to the controller port board. So we've got a few things that we need to do, and I've looked it up now exactly what is doing what on this board. We have a capacitor that needs replacing, and I have a brand new one right here. We're going to replace this old rechargeable battery with a button cell battery holder, and we're going to put a rechargeable battery in that. And we're going to replace this fuse with a resettable fuse. Now there is another resistor here, but I don't really see any need to replace it. I have checked that this is the correct resistor, but it seems unnecessary, as from what I find, these don't tend to fail or have any issues, and they are actually okay. And this one has got kind of a nice little bit of enameled, I suppose, or something on it leg, which means it's kind of not like this. And this looks a bit, honestly, not as good quality. So I'm going to stick with what's on here, and if there are issues with this in the future, I'll replace it. So the first thing we need to do is heat up our iron. So I've heated up my iron. I've also cleaned my iron tip up a little bit from all the plastic and rubbish. And I'm just going to start adding a bit of fresh solder to the pads that are for the battery holder. And then I'm going to use a solder sucker to get the worst of that solder off there. And that should allow me to very carefully start to pull this out. I can see that that's loose there. Now this one appears that it's not really loose, and it's kind of got bent over a bit as well. So I'm going to, once again, solder on and just keep going until I get that clear enough. And that hole's looking pretty clear. And actually, yep, that has ended up coming out quite nicely on that. And that hasn't damaged the traces on the board there, which is good. So it's just a case of popping in the new one. And I've also bent the legs over, which will make it a little bit easier to solder down. Now, I don't need any flux for this, because this is solder that is infused with flux. And we just put a little dab of solder on here. Heat up. There we go. Don't need loads of heat either. And that is, all intents and purposes, this new battery holder bit in. Now I'll clean it up with a toothbrush and some IPA later, but yeah, that's that one. So let's move on to this fuse. Now I know it may seem counterintuitive to some to add fresh solder when you're trying to remove it, but that actually means you can get it through and get it to penetrate fully and then suck it off like that, so to speak. I would like to get a proper desoldering gun, actually. That would be nice. And that has got rid of the majority of that solder, and that's now moving. And there we go. That is that non-resettable controller port fuse out. And this is the new one, which is a resettable fuse. So when you remove power from it and give it a few seconds, it should reset itself, and then it'll all work again like it should. So I've just popped that through the top, and I've bent the leg so it can't fall out. I'm at 450 degrees on my iron, by the way, for anybody that's interested. And just a little bleep, 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 bleep. Another little doopy 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 doop. Make sure that actually melts fully. That's probably more solder on that little bit than it needs, but it's fine. Then you just bend around the leg, cut off the leg, and that's it. You're done. I'm just going to run the iron over it and just smooth it out a little bit over that hole. There we go. Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's not going to short on anything, and that is now the new resettable fuse in there. Now, the next thing we're going to do is this capacitor. Now, you have to be careful with capacitors because they will actually have an orientation where they're supposed to go. You usually get one of the shorter legs is on this. I forget if anode or cathode. I should know this. I do know this, but it's gone out of my head. But either way, I'm going to desolder this now. We start by the same method, which is literally just put fresh solder on, and there we go. That's that bit sucked out, and a bit of fresh solder on here as well, and keep it hot, and bang. There we go. That capacitor is now free to move around. And then I'll just pull out like so, and you can match these capacitors up and actually match them up to the board as well, and see it'll have a marking which will meet up with this. Then we just push it through like so. Then I'm just going to bend these wires over and add a bit of solder. Simple as that. And that is, for all intensive purposes, the soldering job on this done. Just got to cut this off. And you could use some different snips to get a bit closer, but you don't really need to. And just like that, the board is back in the machine. And all I've got to do now is just take this rechargeable battery that I've got here, match the positive to the positive, which is here, and just slide it in. And that's it. So until I can figure out what we're going to do about this unfortunately broken Dream PSU, that's it. I've got the top on and I've got all the screws on, and this is actually undoing quite nicely here now, actually. And since it's all together and pushed together, the mechanism actuates good. I'm pretty happy with that, I must say. I think it's time we plug it in and give it a quick test. Well, I'm sorry about the flickering for the moment. Hopefully that'll go away in a second. But we've got the Dreamcast set upstairs. We've got it on top of my Crystal Xbox. And we're going to press the power button and just... Oh yeah, that's working. And I tell you what, it is so much quieter. It is insane how quiet it is in comparison. In fact... Well, I think we should try out a little game. How about some Sega Rally 2? Let's just do us a quick little race. Okay, let's go with a Toyota Corolla WRC. Oh yeah, this thing is working, and it's working nicely. Whoa. Little twitchy, these cars. And this is nice because it's over a proper RGB connection via a SCART cable onto my TV. Oh yeah. It's quite interesting. You can feel some frame dips on this game. Let's go into bumper cam. Woo! Now let's just feel the side of the Dreamcast. The power supply area is warm, but it's not boiling hot. So I don't know how the airflow changes are affecting things really. Obviously there is a little bit less airflow because it is quieter, but you've still got the shield on the GDEMU, which should still hopefully help direct air over things. I don't know. I'm going to have to just play it and see if it starts doing anything weird, I guess. But for now, I think that is pretty much the majority of what we have to do to this Dreamcast today done. And here we have it. I must say, I'm pretty happy with the way this thing turned out. But I'm not done making videos on this console yet. Oh no. Now, after all the issues I had with the Dream PSU, I've decided to go a bit of a different route on things. Now, I've been speaking online to people who know quite a bit about these consoles, and they have suggested that the best route is probably to actually fully service this power supply, change out the capacitors on it, and maybe remove the 12-volt rail, because I may actually not need that for SCART as much as I thought. Reason being, because from what I understand is the 12-volt line is only to tell the TV to switch to RGB mode, and I can actually manually enter on all of my CRTs, my inputs into RGB mode anyway, so probably not going to be needed. And I'm also not planning to do any HDMI mods on this. The reason being is because I want this to run on old TVs. It's just the way I want to do it. I'm not interested in playing this on my TV in my living room. No, I'm interested in playing this in my own retro setup. So yes, at some point expect a video on me actually repairing the power supply and doing the relevant modifications to it. So if that sounds like something you want to see, then hit the subscribe button and make sure to check out for that in the future. And the other video I'm planning to do with this is getting this thing back online with the DreamPie software and distribution, which allows you to connect these things back up to the internet. Now I want to talk about the Noctua fan mod I did quickly. You can actually get a proper kit for this, which means you don't have to solder anything, and it comes with a little adapter harness with the resistor already in place, and it comes with the 3D printed bits you actually need for the shell. But I decided I'd rather have a little bit more fun, save myself maybe £10 for all the other bits, and actually do the wiring mod myself and 3D print the bits that I want to, because I've got the stuff, I might as well. But if you personally don't want to do the wiring mods to the fan or have to 3D print anything, you can get the whole kit with the fan, with everything you need just to pop it in. And I don't think those kits perhaps need modification to the same amount of the heat shield or anything else that this one does. I'm not sure, haven't used them, but that's the way I understand it. Now, fit and finish wise, how do I find this shell? I think it's actually pretty good. I must say, overall, I'm pretty happy with the quality of it. I mean, this whole shell was only £20-ish, and I think everything for this, which I found on AliExpress, was about £100 to £120 at most, depending on the deals that you could get. So overall, yeah, I don't think that is actually a bad spend to get something which looks pretty cool, works the way I want to, and yeah, should hopefully last a good long time. So for today, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone that's been watching. I want to say thank you to my friend James for actually giving me the Dreamcast so we could modify it and make a video on it today. And with that, don't forget about the podcast, the radiator arms that I'm doing, because if that's something that sounds like is interesting to you, I'd really appreciate it if you could go over and click the link down below and give it a watch or a listen. But until next time, I am Will. This has been another random tech video, and I'll see you all in the next one.